To vascular systems and to failure mechanisms. Number 1541, VPT 094, February 19, 2026. Gerald C. EclaireMD Foundation. Category Stroke. Introduction. This is a comparative study of stroke risk using two individuals' trigger sensitivity index TSI values and their long-term trajectories. The purpose is to examine how vascular events are determined not by a single measurement but by the interaction between hemodynamic load and the remaining structural strength of the vessel wall. This investigation began with a simple observation within one family. A husband and wife have shared the same living environment, similar diet, and comparable access to medical care for more than 6 decades. Despite these similarities, their vascular outcomes are very different. This natural pairing provides a unique opportunity to examine the mechanical and metabolic determinants of stroke using a controlled real-world setting. By placing the two long-term TSI datasets side by side, a clear structural truth emerges. Stroke risk isn't driven by a single factor. It is determined by the interaction between vessel wall strength, reflected by the degree of vascular calcification and long-term metabolic injury, and mechanical load, reflected by blood pressure and pulse pressure. Pathophysiological background, metabolic damage versus hemodynamic load. My medical history is dominated by 36 years of type 2 diabetes, whereas my wife's history is characterized by both diabetes and hypertension. With a shorter duration and lower cumulative metabolic burden, these metabolic conditions affect the vascular system through different but complementary physical mechanisms. Chronic hyperglycemia induces endothelial dysfunction, promotes advanced glycation and product formation, increases oxidative stress, and accelerates medial arterial calcification. These processes reduce elasticity, increase stiffness, and weaken the structural integrity of the vessel wall. The result is a reduction in safety margin against rupture. Hypertension, in contrast, primarily increases the mechanical load applied to the vessel wall. Elevated systolic blood pressure SBP raises circumferential wall stress, while increased pulse pressure PP equals SBP DBP reflects reduced arterial compliance and amplifies cyclic mechanical fatigue. Therefore, diabetes predominantly reduces structural strength, while hypertension predominantly increases external load. Definition and clinical meaning of the Trigger Sensitivity Index TSI to monitor hemodynamic load. The Trigger Sensitivity Index TSI was developed. TSI equals pp 45 SBP 120 100, where pulse pressure pp equals systolic blood pressure SBP minus diastolic blood pressure DBP. TSI contains no glucose term and represents pure hemodynamic load. It functions as a stability gauge rather than a predictor of the exact timing off stroke. When TSI is analyzed longitudinally, it provides a trajectory that reflects the loading history of the vascular system. This separation between blood pressure load and metabolic damage allows the material problem and the loading problem to be examined independently. Comparative TSI trajectories and load history. Both TSI curves remain relatively stable in early 2024, rise toward a peak around 2025 Q1, and then decline afterward. This indicates that both individuals were exposed to a similar external hemodynamic load history. The key difference is not the geometric shape of the trajectory, but the clinical outcome under that load. My wife's TSI values are consistently higher, indicating a higher absolute blood pressure load. However, after the peak, her system returns to a stable range without a vascular event. My TSI curve, despite having a lower average TSI, is followed by a hemorrhagic stroke. This demonstrates a strength-limited failure under a similar load history. Structural interpretation. Load divided by strength. This apparent contradiction is resolved by the fundamental failure equation. Failure equals load/strength. TSI quantifies the hemodynamic load. The remaining structural strength of the vessel wall must be inferred from clinical history, including the duration of diabetes, the degree of vascular calcification as assessed by CT or MR imaging, the presence of kidney disease, and prior cardiovascular events. At present, there is no direct quantitative clinical method to measure the remaining mechanical strength of the vessel wall. This is analogous to the monitoring of aging bridges and aircraft, where structural integrity is estimated from cumulative damage rather than measured directly. To vascular operating modes, two distinct vascular types emerge from this comparison. The first is a strength-limited system, represented by my case. In this condition, the vessel wall has lost much of its structural reserve. The primary danger is an acute systolic blood pressure spike, and the daily survival strategy is strict control of my BP variability. This is why my blood pressure is measured 20 to 24 times per day after the hemorrhagic stroke on June 21, 2025. Stability, not the average value, determines my survivability. The second is a load-dominated system, represented by my wife's case. In this condition, the vessel wall retains sufficient structural integrity. The primary objective is gradual reduction of long-term pressure load through lowering systolic blood pressure and pulse pressure. Limitations of modern clinical measurements. Modern medicine can measure hemodynamic load continuously, but it cannot directly measure the remaining strength of the vessel wall. That strength must be inferred from accumulated metabolic damage and long-term clinical history. This trajectory-based estimation is the same principle used in structural health monitoring and engineering applications. Clinical implications for personalized stroke prevention. When structural strength is low, the only rational strategy is strict load control and spike avoidance. When load is high but structural strength is preserved, the correct strategy is gradual pressure reduction. These are a fundamentally different prevention plans derived from the same mechanical equation. This comparison demonstrates that personalized stroke prevention is not based on population statistics. It is based on identifying whether the limiting factor is internal structural strength or external hemodynamic load. Why a higher TSI can still be safer. At first glance, it seems logical that a lower TSI should always indicate lower stroke risk. This real-world comparison shows that this assumption is incorrect. A higher TSI can still be safer when the vessel wall retains sufficient structural strength and the trajectory remains stable. In contrast, a lower TSI can be dangerous when long-term metabolic damage has reduced the material strength of the vascular system. In that condition, even a moderate pressure surge can exceed the reduced safety margin and trigger rupture. My recent hemorrhagic stroke was triggered by an acute SVPT 175 mmHg on June 21, 2025. In engineering terms, a strong structure can safely carry a heavier load, while a weakened structure can fail under a lighter load. Therefore, the absolute TSI value alone does not determine risk. The true determinant is the relationship between load and remaining strength together with the direction of change over time. This is the most counterintuitive but also the most educational message for patients because it shifts attention away from a single measurement toward the long-term stability revealed by the trajectory. Conclusion: a stroke is not a random event. It is the final mechanical consequence of long-term energy accumulation and progressive reduction of structural safety margin. When patients can see their own trajectory, they can intervene early and change the outcome. The goal is not to predict the exact day of failure but to remain in the stable operating zone. Disclaimer: I write this paper not for fame, but to share what I have learned so others can understand their health, prevent disease, and live longer, healthier lives. This content is provided for educational reference only and does not constitute medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is created. You may share this summary freely, but it must not be altered, edited, or republished as your own. All intellectual property rights and copyrights for this article and its related materials belong to the author, Gerald C. This content is provided for educational reference only and does not constitute medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is created. You may share this summary freely, but it must not be altered, edited, or republished as your own. All intellectual property rights and copyrights for this article and its related materials belong to the author, Gerald C. This content is provided for educational reference only and does not constitute medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is created. You may share this summary freely, but it must not be altered, edited, or republished as your own. All intellectual property rights and copyrights for this article and its related materials belong to the author, Gerald C.